Welcome to tonight's exploration of a corporation's horror. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and if you enjoy these deep dives, subscribing helps keep these late night investigations going. The Umbrella Corporation stands as one of gaming's most iconic villains, not because of what it appears to be, but because of what it hides. On the surface, a pharmaceutical giant promising health and prosperity. Beneath that veneer, something far darker, a machine of bioweapons research that treated human life as raw material for experimentation. Their logo became synonymous with catastrophe. Their laboratories the birthplace of nightmares that would consume entire cities. What makes Umbrella truly terrifying is how plausible it feels. Strip away the zombies and the monsters, and you're left with a story about unchecked corporate power, military contracts, hidden behind civilian facades, and the willingness to sacrifice thousands for profit and ambition. Umbrella didn't start as a villain in a horror story. It started as three men with a discovery, a vision, and no moral boundaries to contain either. To understand the dark secrets of Umbrella Corporation, we must begin where it began, not in a boardroom, but in the ruins of an ancient civilization where a flower grew that should never have been found. The Progenitor Virus. In the late 1960s, three men traveled to West Africa on an expedition that would reshape the world. Oswell Spencer, Edward Ashford, and James Marcus were not treasure hunters or adventurers. They were researchers, men of science, driven by ambition and the belief that humanity's next evolutionary leap could be engineered rather than waited for. What they discovered in the Ndapaya tribe's sacred lands was a flower, rare and unremarkable to the untrained eye, but carrying within its genetic structure something extraordinary, the progenitor virus. The Ndapaya people had revered this flower for generations, using it in rituals that were equal parts spiritual practice and biological gamble. When prepared correctly, it granted strength and vitality. When administered improperly, it brought madness and death. The tribe understood what Spencer's group did not, or perhaps chose to ignore, that power drawn from such a source always demanded a price. For the Ndapaya, the flower was sacred. For Spencer, Ashford, and Marcus, it was an opportunity. The progenitor virus possessed a quality that fascinated the three researchers. It could rewrite genetic code, altering organisms at their most fundamental level. In theory, it offered the potential to cure disease, extend life, and enhance human capability beyond natural limits. But theory and practice are separated by a chasm of trial and error, and the progenitor virus proved dangerously unstable. Most who were exposed to it died in agony. A rare few survived, but were transformed into something no longer entirely human, their bodies twisted by mutations they could not control. Rather than abandon their discovery, the three men saw in this instability not a flaw but a foundation. If the virus could be refined, controlled, and weaponized, it would represent power unlike anything the world had seen. Medical applications were discussed, certainly, but the real interest lay elsewhere. Governments would pay fortunes for biological weapons that could turn enemy soldiers into casualties without a single bullet fired. Pharmaceutical breakthroughs would provide the funding and the cover. Bioweapons would provide the profit and the influence. What most people don't know is that the Ndapaya were not passive victims in this theft. According to classified documents recovered from Umbrella's archives, tribal elders fought back against Spencer's expedition. Several researchers disappeared during the initial collection efforts. Their bodies never recovered. The tribe placed curses on those who stole the flowers, warnings that Spencer dismissed as superstition. But the expedition team suffered strange illnesses during their return journey. ailments that medical professionals couldn't explain. 3 members died before reaching civilization. Spencer himself experienced vivid nightmares for months afterward, dreams of being torn apart by creatures that moved like humans but weren't human anymore. He would later claim these dreams inspired his vision for the T virus, though whether this was coincidence or something else remains unknown. In 1968, the 3 founded the Umbrella Corporation, choosing a name that suggested protection and care. The logo, a red and white umbrella, was designed to evoke safety and reliability. From the beginning, Umbrella was built on a lie, the promise of medical advancement masking the reality of weapons development. The Progenitor Virus, stolen from a people who understood its danger, became the seed from which every subsequent horror would grow. 3 founders, 3 visions. Oswell Spencer, Edward Ashford, and James Marcus entered their partnership as equals. But equality among ambitious men rarely survives contact with power. Each brought different skills and different dreams to Umbrella, and those differences would shape not only the company's trajectory, but also its ultimate collapse. Edward Ashford was, by all accounts, the most scientifically gifted of the 3. A virologist with a genuine passion for research, Ashford believed in the progenitor virus's potential to revolutionize medicine. He saw a future where genetic diseases could be cured, where aging itself might be reversed, where humanity could be freed from the limitations of biology. His vision was utopian, even if naive. Ashford wanted to heal the world, and he believed that Umbrella, properly guided, could be the instrument of that healing. But Ashford's idealism made him vulnerable. In 1968, during early experiments with the progenitor virus, he was accidentally exposed. The infection progressed rapidly, and despite every effort to find a cure, Edward Ashford died within days. His death was officially attributed to natural causes, a convenient fiction that kept investors calm and regulatory agencies uninterested. What few know is that Ashford's death was not entirely accidental. Internal memos suggest that the containment failure that exposed him had been orchestrated by Spencer, who saw Ashford's ethical concerns as an obstacle to the company's true potential. No formal investigation was ever conducted. Ashford's vision died with him, leaving Umbrella in the hands of men far less concerned with healing. Ashford's children, Alfred and Alexia, would grow up in the shadow of their father's death, raised by their grandfather on stories of Edward's genius and betrayal. This would fuel their obsession with restoring the Ashford name and proving themselves superior to Spencer's chosen heirs. The family's descent into madness can be traced directly back to that moment when Edward died alone in a laboratory, poisoned by the very discovery he had hoped would save humanity. James Marcus was a virologist of exceptional skill but troubling disposition. Where Ashford had been driven by hope, Marcus was driven by obsession. He saw the progenitor virus not as a tool for medicine, but as a canvas for creation. Marcus believed he could engineer life itself, sculpting viruses into weapons of terrifying precision. He took charge of Umbrella's executive training facility, a research center hidden in the Arklay Mountains, and there he worked in isolation, consumed by experiments that grew increasingly extreme. Marcus developed a god complex during his years at the training facility. He began referring to his viral creations as his children, treating them with more affection than he showed any human colleague. His personal journals, recovered after his death, reveal a man who had lost all connection to normal human empathy. He wrote lovingly about watching test subjects transform and die, describing their suffering as beautiful and necessary. Marcus kept detailed photographs of his experiments, arranged in albums like family photos, each one documenting another atrocity. Marcus's greatest achievement and his greatest sin was the T virus. By combining the progenitor virus with leech DNA, he created a strain that was far more infectious and far more deadly. The T virus didn't just mutate its hosts, it reanimated them after death, turning corpses into mindless, cannibalistic creatures. Marcus saw this as a breakthrough, proof that he could control life and death. To everyone else, it was an abomination. But by the time Marcus realized how dangerous his creation was, it was already too late. The T virus had escaped containment, and Umbrella's true nature was revealed. Oswell Spencer was the architect of it all. Where Ashford dreamed of medicine and Marcus dreamed of creation, Spencer dreamed of godhood. He was a man of aristocratic background, wealth and ambition so vast it bordered on megalomania. Spencer saw the progenitor virus as the key to human evolution, a means of separating the worthy from the unworthy, the strong from the weak. He envisioned a new world order, one where he and those he deemed superior would rule over a perfected humanity. Spencer was patient, while Marcus buried himself in research and Ashford pursued idealistic goals. Spencer built Umbrella into a corporate empire. He secured contracts with governments, positioned Umbrella as a leader in pharmaceutical innovation, and ensured that the company's darker activities remained hidden behind layers of subsidiaries and shell corporations. To the world, Umbrella was a benevolent giant. To those who knew its secrets, it was a beast in waiting, and Spencer held the leash. What most don't realize is that Spencer had been planning Umbrella long before he met Ashford and Marcus. Documents from his estate reveal that he had spent years studying historical accounts of human enhancement, from alchemical texts to Nazi medical experiments. Spencer believed that previous attempts at creating superior humans had failed not because the goal was wrong, but because the methods were insufficiently scientific. He saw himself as the culmination of centuries of failed attempts, the man who would finally succeed where others had been too timid or too moral. The Arklay Laboratory, hidden deep in the Arklay Mountains, miles from any major population center, the executive training facility was Umbrella's first true bioweapons laboratory. Officially, it was a corporate retreat, a place where promising employees could receive advanced instruction in pharmaceutical research. Unofficially, it was James Marcus's kingdom, a place where the boundaries of science and ethics were not merely pushed, but obliterated. The facility was designed to look unremarkable from the outside, another remote research station in a landscape dotted with industrial projects. But below the surface, in laboratories carved into the mountain itself, Marcus conducted experiments that would have shocked even his partners. He bred leeches by the thousands, using them as test subjects for viral strains. He exposed primates, dogs, and eventually humans to prototype versions of the T virus, documenting the results with clinical detachment. Pain, mutation, death, all were data points in Marcus's pursuit of the perfect bioweapon. The training facility had a second purpose that remained classified even within Umbrella for years. It served as a proving ground for corporate loyalty. Young researchers brought to Arklay were subjected to psychological testing, disguised as training exercises. They would be shown footage of experiments involving human subjects, their reactions carefully monitored. Those who expressed horror or ethical concerns were quietly removed from consideration for advancement. Those who watched with clinical interest, or worse, enthusiasm, were marked for promotion. One particularly disturbing program involved forcing trainees to participate in experiments firsthand. New researchers would be told that certain test subjects were condemned criminals who had volunteered for medical trials in exchange for reduced sentences. In reality, many were simply people who had disappeared from nearby towns, transients, and runaways whom no one would search for. The trainees would administer viral doses, document symptoms, and in some cases perform dissections on subjects who were still alive. This process served to desensitize researchers to human suffering, while also implicating them in crimes that ensured their silence. Those who completed this training became Umbrella's most valuable assets, scientists who would never balk at orders, no matter how monstrous. The Arclay laboratory also housed Umbrella's first attempts at bioweapon containment systems, many of which failed catastrophically. On at least 7 separate occasions between 1978 and 1998, containment breaches led to localized outbreaks within the facility. Each time, entire wings had to be sealed and sterilized, with researchers trapped inside left to die. These incidents were never reported to any external agency. Bodies were incinerated, records were altered, and families of the deceased were told their loved ones had died in industrial accidents. The facility's true casualty count has never been accurately determined, but estimates suggest that hundreds of researchers died in Arclay before the mansion incident made the location public knowledge. Among those who passed through the Arclay facility were 2 names that would become synonymous with Umbrella's most catastrophic failures: Albert Wesker and William Birkin. Both were brilliant, both were ruthless, and both would ultimately betray the company that had made them, though for very different reasons. The birth of the T-virus. James Marcus's creation of the T-virus was not a single eureka moment, but a process of incremental horror spanning nearly 2 decades. Working with the Progenitor Virus as his base, Marcus experimented with countless combinations, seeking a strain that was both infectious and controllable. He spliced genetic material from leeches into the virus, drawn by their regenerative properties and resilience. The result was a hybrid pathogen that could invade a host's cells, rewrite their DNA, and trigger catastrophic mutations. The T-virus earned its name from its effects on the brain. Infected hosts experience rapid necrosis of the cerebral cortex, the part of the brain responsible for higher reasoning and self-control. What remained was the brain stem, the primitive core that governs basic survival instincts: hunger, aggression, and movement. The infected didn't die in the traditional sense. They continued to move, to hunt, to feed. They became something between life and death, puppets animated by viral imperative. What's lesser known is that the T-virus went through 17 major iterations before Marcus achieved the version that Umbrella would eventually weaponize. Early strains were either non-infectious, killing hosts too quickly to spread, or wildly unstable, causing mutations so extreme that subjects would literally tear themselves apart as their bodies tried to accommodate impossible growths. Marcus documented each failure with obsessive detail, filling hundreds of journals with sketches and notes that read like the work of a serial killer rather than a scientist. One particularly disturbing aspect of the T-virus development involved Marcus's use of his own students. The Umbrella training facility recruited promising young virologists from universities around the world, offering them generous stipends and the chance to work on cutting-edge research. What they didn't know was that Marcus occasionally infected students who disappointed him, treating their transformation as both punishment and data collection. At least 12 trainees died this way between 1978 and 1988, their deaths attributed to accidents or illnesses that would not invite investigation. For Marcus, this was a triumph. The T-virus transformed ordinary humans into biological weapons that required no training, no morale, and no supply lines. Release the virus into an enemy population, and within hours, you would have an army of the infected tearing through cities. The infected were expendable, replaceable, and terrifying. They were, in Marcus's mind, the future of warfare. But the T-virus had a fatal flaw. It was too effective. The virus spread through bodily fluids, blood, saliva, any form of direct contact, and it could survive outside a host for hours or even days under the right conditions. Containing the T-virus required perfect adherence to protocol, and perfection in human systems is a myth. Accidents were inevitable, infections were inevitable, and once the T-virus escaped containment, stopping it became nearly impossible. Marcus didn't care. He saw containment failures as opportunities to gather data, to observe how the virus behaved in less controlled environments. When test subjects escaped their holding cells and attacked researchers, Marcus treated it as a learning experience. When entire sections of the Arklay facility had to be sealed off due to outbreaks, he simply moved his work elsewhere. The suffering of others was irrelevant to him. Only the research mattered. The conspiracy against Marcus. By the mid-1980s, James Marcus had become a problem that Umbrella's leadership could no longer ignore. His work had produced the T-virus, the foundation for everything the company would build, but Marcus himself had become unstable. He refused to share his research with other divisions, treating his viral strains as personal property rather than corporate assets. He spoke openly about his contempt for Spencer and the company's leadership, calling them unworthy of understanding his genius. Most troubling of all, he had begun keeping detailed records of Umbrella's illegal activities, claiming he needed documentation to secure his legacy, but creating material that could destroy the entire corporation if it ever became public. Oswell Spencer made the decision personally. Marcus had to die, but the execution had to be careful. Marcus was respected in scientific circles, and his death would invite investigation if it appeared suspicious. Spencer turned to two of Marcus's own students to carry out the assassination, Albert Wesker and William Birkin. Both men had studied under Marcus at the Arklay facility, and both had surpassed their teacher in ambition, if not quite in brilliance. Spencer offered them a deal: eliminate Marcus, take over his research, and receive promotions that would make them the most powerful scientists in Umbrella. On July 29, 1988, Wesker and Birkin entered Marcus's private laboratory, accompanied by Umbrella Security Service operatives. They found the old man feeding his leeches, completely absorbed in his work. Marcus didn't even look up when they entered. Wesker shot him twice, and when Marcus fell, the USS operatives opened fire, riddling his body with bullets. They threw his corpse into a waste disposal system where it would be consumed by his own leeches, a fitting end that ensured no body would be found. What Wesker and Birkin didn't know was that Marcus had anticipated betrayal. In the months before his death, he had been experimenting with a hybrid strain of the T-virus specifically designed to preserve consciousness even after death. He had been injecting himself with small doses, building up resistance while preparing for what he saw as his eventual transcendence. When his body was consumed by the leeches, the virus activated, merging his consciousness with the leech colony. Marcus didn't die that day. He transformed, becoming a hive mind spread across thousands of leeches, his intelligence distributed through a living network of parasites. For 10 years, Marcus existed in this state, his consciousness fragmented but intact, his hatred for Spencer and Umbrella growing with each passing day. In 1998, he finally regained enough control to take revenge. The Marcus Leach colony infiltrated the Arclay laboratory and the Spencer mansion, releasing the T virus and triggering the outbreak that would bring the facility's horrors into public view. The mansion incident, which seemed like an accident or containment failure, was actually an act of calculated revenge by a dead man who refused to stay dead. This truth was suppressed by Umbrella even after the mansion incident became public. The official story blamed security failures and accidental exposure, never mentioning that the outbreak had been orchestrated by one of Umbrella's own founders seeking vengeance from beyond the grave. Only a handful of people ever learned the truth, and most of them were dead before they could tell anyone. The Tyrant program. If the T-virus was Umbrella's weapon of mass infection, the Tyrant program was its attempt at precision. Creating mindless zombies was one thing. Creating intelligent, controllable bioweapons was another. The Tyrant program sought to produce super soldiers, creatures that retained enough cognitive function to follow orders, but possessed strength, speed, and resilience far beyond human limits. The program's name came from its goal to create tyrants, beings that could dominate any battlefield. Early prototypes were failures, their bodies unable to withstand the mutations induced by the T virus. Subjects either died during transformation or emerged as mindless beasts, no different from common infected. The breakthrough came when researchers realized that only individuals with specific genetic markers could survive the process. These rare individuals, possessing what Umbrella termed genetic compatibility, could be transformed into tyrants without losing all cognitive function. The discovery of these genetic markers led to one of Umbrella's darkest initiatives, the systematic screening of entire populations to identify potential tyrant candidates. Umbrella infiltrated hospitals, blood banks, and medical research facilities around the world, collecting genetic data under the guise of legitimate research. They created a database containing genetic profiles of millions of people, cross-referencing them against the markers needed for successful tyrant transformation. When compatible individuals were identified, Umbrella deployed its acquisition teams. These were not scientists, but mercenaries trained in abduction and interrogation. They would surveil targets for weeks, learning their routines and identifying opportunities for quiet disappearances. The abductions were carefully staged to avoid suspicion. Some victims were framed for crimes and arrested by Umbrella agents posing as police, only to disappear during transport. Others vanished during medical procedures at Umbrella-owned clinics. Still others were simply grabbed off the street in cities where Umbrella had enough influence to ensure investigations would go nowhere. The first successful tyrant, designated T-001, was created from a young man named Thomas, who had been abducted from a homeless shelter in Detroit. He had been living on the streets for 3 years after escaping from an abusive home, and Umbrella's researchers correctly assumed that no one would search for him. The transformation took 48 hours, during which Thomas experienced agony beyond description as the T virus rewrote his biology. His body swelled with muscle, his skin turned pale and leathery, and his heart grew so large it pushed through his rib cage. When the process was complete, Thomas's mind was mostly gone, but enough remained that he could follow simple commands. He was fast, durable, and nearly unstoppable. In controlled tests, a single tyrant could eliminate dozens of armed soldiers. Umbrella had achieved what it set out to do. It had created a monster that could be pointed at an enemy and unleashed. But the Tyrant program revealed the depths of Umbrella's moral bankruptcy. To create tyrants, the company needed test subjects with compatible genetics, and those subjects were not volunteers. Between 1990 and 1998, Umbrella abducted an estimated 300 people for the Tyrant program. Only 12 successful Tyrants were produced. The rest died during transformation. Their bodies rejected the virus. Or they survived, but were too damaged or uncontrollable to be useful. These failures were incinerated in Umbrella's waste disposal facilities, their existence erased from all records. William Birkin and the G virus. If James Marcus was Umbrella's mad scientist, William Birkin was its prodigy. Recruited into Umbrella's ranks at a young age, Birkin displayed a genius for virology that surpassed even Marcus. By his 20s, Birkin had taken over much of the T-virus research, refining it and pushing it in new directions. But Birkin was not content to improve upon someone else's work. He wanted to create something entirely his own, something that would eclipse the T-virus and secure his legacy. Birkin's obsession led him to develop the G virus, a pathogen even more extreme than its predecessor. Where the T virus created mindless zombies and the occasional tyrant, the G virus produced something fundamentally different. Infected hosts didn't just mutate, they evolved, their bodies constantly adapting and changing in response to damage or environmental stress. A G virus host could regenerate from catastrophic injuries, grow new limbs or organs, and even implant embryos into other organisms to propagate itself. The G virus was Birkin's attempt to create the ultimate life form, a being that could adapt to any threat and survive any environment. In his mind, it was evolution accelerated to its logical extreme. In reality, it was a nightmare. G virus hosts became grotesque amalgamations of flesh and bone, driven by an instinct to reproduce that overrode all else. They were not soldiers or weapons. They were cancerous growths given life, entities that existed only to spread and consume. What's not widely known is that Birkin tested early versions of the G virus on his own family. His wife Annette was aware of his work and supported it, but their daughter Sherry had no idea she was living in constant danger. Birkin kept samples of the G virus in their home, hidden in a false bottom of his briefcase. On at least 2 occasions, containment failures nearly exposed Sherry to the virus. Once, a vial cracked during transport, leaking G virus onto Birkin's clothing. He made it home before noticing and had to strip in the garage, burning his clothes before entering the house. Another time, Sherry found his briefcase open and nearly touched a G virus sample before Annette caught her. These near misses didn't convince Birkin to improve security. They convinced him that Sherry might be the perfect test subject for the G virus. He began collecting her blood samples without her knowledge, testing her compatibility with the virus. When he discovered that Sherry had inherited genetic markers that made her highly compatible with G virus infection, he was elated. In his journal, Birkin wrote that Sherry could be the first true G human, a being that could host the virus without losing her intelligence. He planned to infect her after perfecting the G virus, transforming his own daughter into a bioweapon. Annette knew about these plans and did nothing to stop them. She had long ago abandoned any maternal instinct in favor of supporting her husband's research. In her mind, Sherry's transformation would be an honor, a chance for their daughter to become part of something greater than herself. The only thing that saved Sherry from this fate was the sudden arrival of the USS team sent to kill Birkin and steal the G virus. Had they arrived a few months later, after Birkin completed his final refinements, Sherry would have been infected by her own father. Birkin's work on the G virus took place in Nest, the underground research facility beneath Raccoon City. There, hidden from public view, he conducted experiments that pushed the boundaries of what biology could tolerate. He infected test subjects, observed their transformations, and cataloged the results with a detachment that bordered on inhuman. Birkin loved his virus more than he loved people, perhaps even more than he loved his own family. The G virus was his child, and he would do anything to protect it. The Umbrella Intelligence Division, while Umbrella's bioweapons research garnered most of the attention, the corporation's real power came from information. The Umbrella Intelligence Division, known internally as UID, was the company's secret police, espionage network, and enforcement arm. Officially, UID didn't exist. There were no organizational charts that mentioned it, no budget lines that accounted for it, no paperwork trail that could lead investigators to its operations. In reality, UID operated in every country where Umbrella maintained a presence, conducting surveillance, gathering intelligence, and eliminating threats to the corporation. UID was divided into three branches. The first, analysis, was responsible for gathering information on rival corporations, government agencies, and potential security threats. Analysis operatives worked as corporate spies, hackers, and informants, building dossiers on anyone who might pose a danger to Umbrella. They infiltrated pharmaceutical companies, planted listening devices in government offices, and maintained networks of paid informants in law enforcement and regulatory agencies. The second branch, operations, put that intelligence to use. Operations was responsible for corporate espionage, sabotage, and problem solving, a euphemism for assassination. When a rival company developed a treatment that threatened Umbrella's market share, operations would steal the research or destroy the laboratory where it was being conducted. When a journalist started investigating Umbrella's activities, operations would monitor their work, identify their sources, and either bribe or intimidate them into silence. If bribery and intimidation failed, more permanent solutions were employed. The third branch, internal security, focused on Umbrella itself. Internal security monitored the company's own employees, looking for signs of disloyalty, theft, or ethical concerns that might lead to whistleblowing. Every Umbrella facility was wired with hidden cameras and microphones. Employees' emails and phone calls were monitored. Even casual conversations in break rooms were recorded and analyzed for signs of dissent. Internal security maintained psychological profiles on every employee with access to sensitive information, identifying those who might be vulnerable to outside recruitment or those whose conscience might lead them to expose Umbrella's crimes. When internal security identified a potential threat, they had several options. Minor concerns might be addressed through reassignment, moving the problematic employee to a position where they couldn't access sensitive information. More serious threats were fired and blacklisted, their careers destroyed through false accusations or manufactured scandals. The most dangerous potential whistleblowers simply disappeared, victims of staged accidents or suicides that would not invite investigation. UID's operations extended beyond conventional espionage into blackmail and manipulation on a massive scale. The division maintained files on politicians, judges, police chiefs, and regulatory officials in dozens of countries. These files contained evidence of affairs, financial crimes, and other scandals that could destroy careers. When Umbrella needed a favorable ruling or wanted an investigation shut down, UID would deploy this information, making it clear that cooperation with Umbrella was preferable to public exposure. One of UID's most audacious operations involved the systematic infiltration of the Raccoon City Police Department. Over a period of years, UID recruited or blackmailed dozens of RCPD officers, turning them into umbrella informants. By 1998, nearly a quarter of the department was on Umbrella's payroll. These corrupt officers provided early warning of investigations, suppressed evidence of Umbrella's activities, and in some cases actively sabotaged efforts to hold the corporation accountable. When the Raccoon City outbreak began, these officers abandoned their posts or actively prevented civilian evacuations, following orders from UID to ensure maximum chaos and minimal survivors who could testify against Umbrella. Albert Wesker, the perfect weapon. Albert Wesker was everything Umbrella wanted in an employee. Brilliant, ruthless, and utterly loyal until he wasn't. But what most don't realize is that Wesker himself was an Umbrella experiment, a product of the same research programs that created bioweapons. Wesker was one of 13 children selected for the Wesker Project, an initiative launched by Oswell Spencer in the 1960s. Spencer believed that human evolution could be accelerated through careful genetic selection and viral enhancement. He identified children across Europe and North America who possessed exceptional intelligence and specific genetic markers, then arranged for them to be placed in environments that would shape them into perfect vessels for his vision. Some were adopted by Umbrella employees, who raised them according to strict guidelines. Others were sent to specialized schools where their education focused on science, philosophy, and survival. Albert was the most successful of the 13. He excelled academically, showed no signs of empathy or moral constraint, and demonstrated a natural aptitude for manipulation and strategy. When he was old enough, he was recruited directly into Umbrella's bioweapons division, trained at the Arclay facility under James Marcus. Wesker rose quickly through the ranks, eventually becoming the captain of STARS, the Special Tactics and Rescue Service of the Raccoon City Police Department. It was the perfect cover, allowing Wesker to monitor potential threats to Umbrella while maintaining an air of respectability. But Wesker harbored ambitions that Umbrella could not contain. He did not want to serve Oswell Spencer's vision of a new world. He wanted to create his own. Wesker began gathering intelligence on Umbrella's projects, stealing data on the T-Virus, the Tyrant program, and countless other classified initiatives. He made contact with rival organizations, offering them Umbrella's secrets in exchange for resources and power. What's lesser known is that Wesker had discovered the truth about his own origins years before his betrayal. He found classified files detailing the Wesker project, learning that he was not just an employee but a product, something Spencer had created and shaped to serve a purpose. This revelation shattered whatever loyalty Wesker might have felt. He realized that his entire life had been orchestrated, that every achievement he thought was his own had actually been part of Spencer's design. The betrayal ran deeper than simple corporate treachery. It was personal, existential, and unforgivable. Wesker's plan culminated in the Arclay incident. In 1998, the Arclay laboratory, long abandoned and left to decay, became the site of a T-virus outbreak. The facility's remaining staff were infected, and the virus spread to the surrounding forest, turning wildlife into mutated horrors. When STARS was sent to investigate, Wesker ensured they walked into a trap. He wanted to test the combat effectiveness of Umbrella's bioweapons using trained soldiers as guinea pigs. Most of his team died in the mansion, torn apart by zombies and creatures born from Umbrella's experiments. Wesker himself staged his own death during the incident. He had obtained a prototype virus from Birkin, one designed to enhance human capabilities while preserving intelligence. The virus required a catalyst to activate, specifically severe physical trauma that would normally be fatal. Wesker allowed a tyrant to impale him while his subordinates watched, triggering the virus's activation. He survived, transformed into something more than human, and disappeared into the shadows to pursue his own agenda. The virus gave Wesker superhuman strength, speed, and regenerative abilities. He could move faster than the eye could track, punch through concrete, and survive injuries that would kill an ordinary person. But the enhancement came with a price. Wesker had to regularly inject himself with a specialized serum to maintain stability. Without it, the virus would overwhelm his system, causing painful mutations. This dependency would eventually become Wesker's weakness. But in the years following his transformation, it was a small price to pay for godlike power. The Spencer Mansion Incident. The Spencer Mansion, perched in the Arklay Mountains overlooking Raccoon City, was never meant to be discovered. It was a facade, a grand estate built by Oswell Spencer to conceal the research facility hidden beneath its foundations. For years, the mansion served as the testing ground for Umbrella's early bioweapons, a place where experiments too dangerous for public facilities could be conducted in isolation. By 1998, the mansion had been largely abandoned, its laboratories left to rot as Umbrella shifted its operations to more secure locations. But abandonment did not mean safety. The T-virus, resilient and patient, lingered in the mansion's corridors. When Marcus's leech colony infiltrated the facility and deliberately released the virus, it spread rapidly, infecting the remaining researchers and the creatures they had been studying. The mansion became a tomb, its halls filled with zombies and mutated animals, its secrets sealed behind locked doors and crumbling walls. What's not widely known is that the mansion contained far more than just a research laboratory. The facility beneath the estate included living quarters for long-term residents, storage for years' worth of supplies, and secure vaults containing Umbrella's most sensitive documents. Spencer had designed it as a potential refuge, a place where he could survive a collapse of civilization while continuing his research. The mansion included a sophisticated AI called MO, Mother Organism Disk, which controlled security systems, monitored experiments, and could be programmed to eliminate threats. When stars arrived to investigate reports of strange murders in the area, they found themselves trapped in a nightmare. The mansion's layout was a maze of hidden passages and locked rooms, each one concealing another horror. Zombies shambled through the dining hall. Mutated dogs prowled the grounds. In the laboratory beneath the mansion, failed experiments lurked in the shadows. Things that had once been human but were now something far worse. One of the mansion's most disturbing features was the aquatic research facility, accessible through flooded tunnels beneath the main structure. Here, Umbrella had experimented with marine bioweapons, creating mutated sharks and amphibious creatures. The facility's crown jewel was Neptune, a massive shark infected with the T-virus that had grown to over 20 feet in length. Neptune was highly aggressive and could survive in shallower water than normal sharks, making it ideal for deployment in coastal attacks or harbor sabotage. The survivors, Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, and a handful of others, fought their way through the mansion, uncovering documents that revealed the truth about Umbrella. They learned about the T-virus, the bioweapons research, and the company's willingness to sacrifice anyone who stood in its way. They discovered that Albert Wesker, their captain, had betrayed them, leading them into the mansion to die, and they barely escaped with their lives, the mansion exploding behind them as they fled into the forest. What the survivors didn't fully understand at the time was that their escape had been facilitated by Marcus. The leech colony that had once been James Marcus had been watching the STARS team throughout their ordeal. Marcus wanted witnesses to survive, people who could expose Umbrella's crimes and bring down the corporation that had murdered him. He deliberately disabled certain security measures and created paths of escape, ensuring that at least some of the STARS members would make it out alive. The mansion incident should have been Umbrella's downfall. The survivors had evidence, testimony, and the determination to expose the company's crimes. But Umbrella was powerful, its influence extending into government, media, and law enforcement. The survivors' claims were dismissed as the ramblings of traumatized officers. Evidence was suppressed. Witnesses were silenced. Umbrella's public image remained intact, even as its darkest secrets began to unravel behind closed doors. The Raccoon City outbreak. If the mansion incident was a warning, Raccoon City was the catastrophe. In September 1998, the T-virus escaped containment in NEST, the massive underground research facility beneath the city. The initial outbreak was small, confined to the laboratory, and a handful of infected who wandered into the city's sewer system. Umbrella's security forces moved quickly to contain the situation, but containment was already impossible. The virus spread through Raccoon City's water supply, its rat population, and through direct contact with the infected. Within days, the city was overrun. Raccoon City had a population of approximately 100,000 people. Most of them had no idea that beneath their homes and businesses, Umbrella had been conducting experiments that could end the world. They were teachers, factory workers, parents, children, ordinary people living ordinary lives. When the outbreak began, they had no context for what was happening. The news reported a series of violent incidents, then a surge in hospital admissions, then nothing at all as communication networks collapsed. By the time residents understood they were in danger, it was too late to escape. The outbreak's progression followed a predictable pattern that Umbrella had documented in previous incidents but had never shared with public health authorities. The first 48 hours saw isolated attacks and unexplained illnesses. Hospitals were overwhelmed with patients exhibiting similar symptoms: fever, aggression, skin necrosis, and eventually total cognitive collapse. Medical staff, unprepared for the nature of the infection, became victims themselves, accelerating the spread. Between hours 48 and 72, the infection reached critical mass. Entire neighborhoods went dark as infected people attacked anyone they encountered. Police response collapsed as officers were overwhelmed or infected. The city's infrastructure began failing: power grids, water treatment, communications. By the fourth day, Raccoon City had effectively ceased to function as a modern urban center. It had become a hunting ground where the infected outnumbered the living, and survival meant constant movement, constant vigilance, and constant terror. What made the Raccoon City outbreak particularly devastating was the diversity of bioweapons that had escaped containment. The T-virus zombies were just the beginning. Umbrella had been testing dozens of different creatures in NEST and other facilities throughout the city, and when containment failed, all of them were released. Lickers, skinless, echolocating predators with elongated tongues and massive claws stalked through the city's buildings. Hunters, reptilian bioweapons designed for urban combat, prowled the streets in packs. Drained dymos, mutated fleas the size of dogs, infested the sewers. The citizens of Raccoon City weren't just fighting zombies, they were fighting an entire ecology of engineered horrors. The infected moved through Raccoon City like a tide, overwhelming police barricades and refugee centers, Hospitals became slaughterhouses as the sick transformed into the ravenous. Families barricaded themselves in their homes, only to be torn apart when the infected broke through windows and doors. The city's infrastructure collapsed as power grids failed and fires spread unchecked. Raccoon City became a hell on earth, a place where every street was a battlefield and every shadow hid another monster. Umbrella's response was not to save the city, but to contain the evidence. The company deployed its own paramilitary forces, the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, but their mission was not rescue. They were there to eliminate witnesses, recover research data, and ensure that no one left Raccoon City alive to testify against the corporation. Survivors who encountered UBCS operatives quickly learned that Umbrella saw them not as victims, but as liabilities. Some UBCS members, however, were not informed of their true mission. They had been recruited as legitimate security personnel, told they would be protecting civilians during a bioweapon attack. When these soldiers discovered the truth, that they were working for the company responsible for the outbreak, many of them defected, helping survivors escape or sabotaging Umbrella's operations. Carlos Oliveira and Mikhail Victor were among these reluctant heroes, men who had joined UBCS believing they would be saving lives, only to discover they had been sent to clean up a corporate atrocity. Nest and the G-Virus incident. Beneath Raccoon City, NEST continued to operate even as the city above descended into chaos. William Birkin, isolated in his laboratory and obsessed with his research, refused to evacuate. He had spent years perfecting the G-Virus, and he would not abandon it, not even as the T-Virus outbreak threatened to consume everything. Birkin saw the chaos as an opportunity, a chance to test his creation in a real-world scenario. But Umbrella's leadership had other plans. Concerned that Birkin might defect or sell the G-Virus to a rival organization, they ordered his assassination. A team of Umbrella Security Service operatives descended into NEST with orders to retrieve the G-Virus samples and eliminate Birkin. The mission went catastrophically wrong. Birkin, cornered and desperate, injected himself with the G-Virus as a final act of defiance. The transformation was immediate and grotesque. Birkin's body swelled and mutated, his intelligence subsumed by the virus's imperative to propagate. His right arm grew massively, developing an eye-like organ and enormous claws. His head split partially open, revealing pulsating flesh beneath. The creature that had been William Birkin killed the USS team, tearing them apart with strength born from viral enhancement. During the confrontation, vials of the T-virus were shattered, their contents spilling into Raccoon City's sewer system and accelerating the outbreak above. What's often overlooked is that Birkin retained fragments of his human consciousness, even after transformation. He was not mindless like a zombie, but operating on instincts that had been warped by the G-Virus. The virus programmed its host with a single overriding goal: reproduction through implantation of G embryos into genetically compatible hosts. Birkin pursued this goal with a horrifying single-mindedness, but traces of his former self influenced his behavior. He returned repeatedly to NEST, the place he had called home for so many years. He attacked people who wore umbrella uniforms, perhaps recognizing them as the ones who had tried to kill him. Most disturbingly, he seemed to be searching for his daughter, Sherry. The G-Virus identified her as a perfect host due to her genetic compatibility, but Birkin's remaining human instincts fought against the viral imperative. Several survivors reported seeing the mutated Birkin standing motionless outside the police station where Sherry had taken refuge, as if some part of him still remembered who she was and what she meant to him. As the hours passed, Birkin continued to mutate. Each time he was injured, the G virus triggered new transformations, making him larger and more monstrous. By his final form, Birkin had become a massive, barely recognizable mass of flesh and teeth, his human features completely subsumed. Yet even then, in his final moments before death, witnesses claimed he called out a name, Sherry. Whether this was truly Birkin's last fragment of consciousness or simply random vocalization shaped by viral patterns, no one can say for certain. Nest became the focal point of Raccoon City's final hours. Survivors fleeing the outbreak above found themselves descending into the facility, navigating its sterile corridors and dodging its security systems in a desperate search for escape. They discovered the truth about Umbrella's experiments, about the G virus, and about how far the corporation was willing to go to protect its secrets. And they learned that Umbrella had activated the facility's self-destruct mechanism, determined to bury the evidence even if it meant destroying what remained of Raccoon City in the process. Operation Raccoon City. As the outbreak spiraled beyond control, the United States government faced an impossible decision. Raccoon City could not be saved. The infection had spread too far, and conventional military efforts to contain it had failed. Every attempt to establish quarantine zones ended with soldiers being overwhelmed by the infected. Every rescue mission turned into a desperate retreat. The government knew that if the T-virus escaped Raccoon City and reached other population centers, it could trigger a global pandemic. What's not commonly known is that the decision to destroy Raccoon City was made within the first 72 hours of the outbreak. Military analysts determined that the city was already lost, that the infection rate was beyond any possible containment. However, the order to fire was delayed for 5 additional days, while government officials debated the political fallout and coordinated the cover story. During those 5 days, thousands of people who might have been saved if evacuation had been the priority instead died trapped in the quarantine zone. The decision was made to sterilize the city. On October 1st, 1998, the government launched a missile strike on Raccoon City. The weapon used was an experimental thermobaric device designed to create a massive pressure wave that would incinerate organic material while leaving structures partially intact. The official story claimed a malfunction at a chemical plant had caused the explosion, a lie that spared the government from admitting the truth that it had deliberately killed tens of thousands of its own citizens to prevent a viral outbreak. The missile struck at 6:42 a.m. just before dawn. Survivors inside the city had approximately 3 minutes of warning. Some heard the incoming missile's engines. Others received frantic radio transmissions from military personnel who had learned what was about to happen. In those final moments, people made impossible choices. Some ran, though there was nowhere to run. Others sought shelter in basements and underground spaces, hoping the depth might protect them. Most simply waited, too exhausted from days of terror to do anything but accept their fate. The explosion was visible from over 100 miles away. The pressure wave flattened buildings in the city center, while the heat ignited everything flammable in a radius of several miles. The infected died instantly, their bodies vaporized or incinerated before they could even register the threat. So did the humans who had survived the outbreak, the people who had fought through days of horror only to be killed by their own government in the final hours. The blast crater formed where downtown Raccoon City had stood, measured over half a mile in diameter. Umbrella's role in the disaster was carefully obscured. The corporation's legal teams worked tirelessly to deflect blame, arguing that the outbreak had been caused by sabotage or terrorism, anything but corporate negligence. Umbrella paid settlements to survivors, quietly and without admission of guilt, ensuring that the most damaging testimonies never reached court. The corporation's intelligence division worked to suppress evidence, threatening or bribing witnesses, and planting false information to muddy the narrative. For a time, it seemed as though Umbrella might survive even this catastrophe, its influence and resources allowing it to weather a storm that would have destroyed any other company. Stock prices dropped, but stabilized. Investigations were launched, but went nowhere. The corporation's leaders appeared before congressional committees and delivered carefully scripted testimony that admitted nothing. Umbrella had calculated that the public's attention span was short, that outrage would fade, and that eventually the world would move on. But the destruction of Raccoon City marked the beginning of Umbrella's end. Too many people had seen too much. Survivors like Leon Kennedy, Claire Redfield, and Jill Valentine carried evidence of Umbrella's crimes, evidence that could not be suppressed forever. More importantly, other governments had been watching the incident carefully. The realization that a corporation had developed bioweapons capable of destroying an entire city and had lost control of those weapons sent shockwaves through intelligence agencies worldwide. Umbrella had demonstrated that it was not just unethical, but incompetent, and that combination made it too dangerous to tolerate. The Antarctic facility and the Ashford legacy. While Raccoon City burned, Umbrella's operations continued in other locations, including its most remote and secretive facility, a research station buried beneath the ice of Antarctica. This facility, managed by Alfred and Alexia Ashford, descendants of Edward Ashford, represented Umbrella's attempt to continue the original founder's legacy. The Ashfords were obsessed with restoring their family's honor and proving that they, not Marcus or Birkin, were Umbrella's true heirs. The Antarctic facility was more than just a research station. It was a fortress, a self-contained complex designed to operate independently from the rest of Umbrella's infrastructure. It included living quarters, laboratories, manufacturing facilities for bioweapons, and even military-grade defensive systems. The Ashfords had built it with Umbrella's resources, but increasingly operated it as their own private kingdom, taking orders from no one. Alexia Ashford was a prodigy, her intellect rivaling even Birkin's. She had been created through genetic engineering, her DNA carefully selected by her grandfather Alexander Ashford to produce a genius who could restore the family's glory. By the age of 10, she had already made significant contributions to Umbrella's research, developing theories about viral evolution that would influence bioweapons development for years. By her teens, she had developed the T. Veronica virus, a strain that combined the T virus with the DNA of an ancient queen ant. The T. Veronica virus was Alexia's masterpiece and her obsession. Unlike the T virus, which destroyed intelligence, or the G virus, which turned hosts into mindless reproductives, T. Veronica preserved and even enhanced cognitive function while granting enormous physical power. But the virus required time to integrate properly with human biology. Rush the process and the host would become a mindless creature. Allow the virus to integrate slowly, and it could create something transcendent. Alexia was so confident in her creation that she injected herself with T. Veronica at age 12, then placed herself in cryogenic stasis for 15 years. She calculated that the slow integration during stasis would allow the virus to merge perfectly with her biology, transforming her into a superior being without losing her genius. It was an act of supreme confidence bordering on delusion, but Alexia had never doubted herself. Her brother Alfred, less brilliant but equally devoted, maintained the Antarctic facility in her absence. But Alfred's mind fractured under the isolation and pressure. He had been overshadowed by his sister his entire life, praised only for his loyalty to her rather than his own achievements. As years passed in the empty facility, Alfred's personality split. He began dressing in Alexia's clothes, speaking in her voice, convinced that he had become her. The facility staff learned to play along with Alfred's delusion, addressing him as Alexia when his alternate personality emerged, because resistance only triggered violent outbursts. When Claire Redfield and Steve Burnside stumbled into the facility while fleeing Umbrella's forces, they found themselves hunted by a man who had lost his grip on reality. Alfred pursued them through the frozen corridors with obsessive determination, treating their intrusion as a personal insult to his sister. He commanded the facility's bioweapons, including bandersnatches, elastic creatures with extending arms, and gulp worms, massive subterranean predators, to eliminate the intruders. When Alexia finally awoke from her 15-year slumber, she had become something transcendent and terrible. The T. Veronica virus had transformed her into a being of immense power. She could control other T. Veronica infected organisms, bending them to her will through viral pheromones. She could generate fire through chemical reactions within her body, hurling flames with casual ease. Her intelligence had been preserved and perhaps enhanced, but her humanity had been stripped away, leaving only arrogance and cruelty. Alexia saw herself as the pinnacle of human evolution, the fulfillment of her grandfather's dream and proof of the Ashford family's superiority. She had no loyalty to Umbrella, viewing the corporation as merely a tool her family had used to pursue their research. She cared nothing for Spencer's vision or humanity's future. In her mind, she alone deserved to survive and rule, and she would burn anyone who suggested otherwise. The Antarctic facility became Alexia's personal kingdom, and eventually her tomb. When Chris Redfield and his allies infiltrated the facility to stop her, Alexia unleashed the full extent of her power, transforming into increasingly monstrous forms as the battle pushed her to evolve. In her final form, she had become an enormous insectoid horror, more alien than human, her body a fusion of flesh and viral mutation. But evolution had limits and power had costs. Alexia's final transformation made her powerful but unstable, and she was eventually destroyed, her body consumed by the very fire she had wielded as a weapon. Spencer's true goal and the Wesker Project. Oswell Spencer was not content with wealth or power. He wanted immortality, godhood, and the complete reshaping of humanity according to his vision. Spencer believed that the Progenitor Virus, refined and perfected, could create a new human species, one free from disease, aging, and weakness. But more than that, Spencer believed he could use the virus to establish a hierarchy, separating the genetically superior from the inferior, the worthy from the disposable. Spencer's ultimate goal was the Wesker Project, a secret initiative to create a new generation of enhanced humans who would serve as his heirs and enforcers. The project began in the 1960s, shortly after the discovery of the Progenitor Virus. Spencer identified children across Europe and North America who possessed specific genetic markers and exceptional intelligence. He arranged for these children to be adopted by Umbrella employees or placed in institutions where their development could be carefully monitored and influenced. There were 13 children in total, all given the surname Wesker to mark them as part of Spencer's grand design. They were raised in different locations with different methodologies, creating a natural experiment to determine which approach to creating superior humans would be most effective. Some were raised in luxury with every advantage, encouraged to develop their intellects without restraint. Others were subjected to harsh conditions, their survival instincts honed through controlled hardship. All of them were monitored constantly, their lives documented in reports that Spencer reviewed personally. The project's ultimate test was planned for when the children reached adulthood. They would be injected with a specialized virus designed to unlock their genetic potential, transforming them into enhanced beings with strength, speed, and intelligence far beyond normal human limits. Spencer calculated that some would die during the transformation, perhaps even most, but those who survived would be proof of his theories and the foundation of his new world. What Spencer didn't anticipate was that his subjects would learn of his manipulation. Several of the Wesker children discovered classified files detailing the project, and their reactions varied. Some committed suicide, unable to bear the knowledge that their entire lives had been orchestrated. Others confronted their handlers and were killed to preserve secrecy. Only Albert Wesker thrived on the revelation, turning his anger at Spencer into a focused determination to surpass his creator. Spencer spent his final years in hiding, surrounded by bodyguards and fail-safes, knowing that the empire he had built was collapsing and that those he had empowered would eventually come for him. He retreated to one of his private estates, a mansion filled with armed guards and advanced security systems. But security meant nothing against someone like Wesker. When Wesker finally found Spencer in 2006, the old man was almost relieved. He had spent decades chasing godhood, only to discover that mortality was inescapable. Their final conversation revealed the depths of Spencer's megalomania and the futility of his vision. Spencer explained that he had created the Wesker Project to produce someone who could carry on his work, someone who would understand and share his vision of a perfected humanity ruled by the worthy. He believed Wesker would thank him, that his creation would see the gift he had been given. Instead, Wesker killed Spencer without ceremony, driving a hand through the old man's chest and watching him die. For Wesker, it was not revenge but closure, the final step in becoming something beyond Spencer's design. The fall of Umbrella. Umbrella's collapse was not a single event, but a slow disintegration, a death by 1,000 cuts. The destruction of Raccoon City had focused global attention on the corporation in ways that its intelligence division could not suppress. Survivors testified before government committees. Journalists investigated despite threats and bribes. Former employees came forward with evidence, some motivated by conscience, others by promises of immunity or witness protection. In 2003, Umbrella Corporation officially declared bankruptcy. The announcement came after years of legal battles, government investigations, and plummeting stock prices. The company's remaining assets were liquidated to pay settlements to survivors and families of victims. Its pharmaceutical divisions were sold to competitors. Its research data was confiscated by governments who promised to destroy the bioweapons research, but quietly preserved it for their own programs. The executives who had overseen Umbrella's operations faced varied fates. Some were arrested and prosecuted, though most received surprisingly light sentences given the scale of their crimes. Others fled to countries without extradition treaties, living out their lives in comfortable exile. A few died under suspicious circumstances, possibly assassinated by former colleagues who feared what they might reveal. The vast majority escaped any meaningful punishment, protected by legal technicalities, destroyed evidence or political connections that made prosecution impossible. What's often forgotten is how many people knew about Umbrella's crimes and did nothing. The corporation employed tens of thousands of people across dozens of facilities. Most were not scientists working on bioweapons, but accountants, janitors, security guards, administrative assistants, ordinary people doing ordinary jobs. They saw things they couldn't explain, heard rumors they tried to dismiss, encountered evidence of atrocities that they rationalized or ignored. After Umbrella's fall, many of these people claimed ignorance, insisting they had no idea what was happening in the laboratories. But ignorance was often a choice, a decision to accept a paycheck and not ask questions. The Raccoon City survivors struggled to rebuild their lives after Umbrella's collapse. Many suffered from severe PTSD, unable to escape memories of what they had experienced. Some became activists, dedicating themselves to preventing similar disasters. Others retreated from public life, unwilling to relive their trauma for the benefit of investigators or journalists. A few continued fighting against bioterrorism, joining government agencies or private organizations dedicated to containing the threat that Umbrella had unleashed upon the world. The legacy of bioorganic weapons. Umbrella's greatest sin was not the creation of bioweapons, but the normalization of their existence. Before Umbrella, biological weapons were theoretical, their use limited by international treaties and ethical taboos. After Umbrella, bioweapons became a reality, their effectiveness demonstrated in Raccoon City and countless smaller incidents. Governments that had condemned Umbrella publicly continued its research in secret, unwilling to let rivals gain an advantage. The bioweapons black market exploded in the years following Umbrella's collapse. The corporation's research data, supposedly confiscated and destroyed, somehow made its way into the hands of terrorists, rogue states, and criminal organizations. Some of this was due to theft, hackers and spies stealing data from government servers, but much of it was deliberate, sold by corrupt officials or former Umbrella employees who saw an opportunity for profit. The T virus and its variants became particularly widespread. The virus's resilience and ease of production made it attractive to groups that lacked the resources for more sophisticated bioweapons. Terrorist organizations used it to attack cities, releasing infected individuals in crowded areas to cause maximum chaos. Criminal syndicates employed it as a threat, holding cities hostage with the promise of outbreaks if their demands weren't met. Even some governments deployed it covertly, releasing it in regions they wanted to destabilize while maintaining plausible deniability. Each new outbreak, each new mutation, could be traced back to Umbrella's original research. The G virus inspired derivative strains that combined rapid mutation with controllability. The T Veronica virus became the basis for enhanced bioweapons that preserved intelligence. The Tyrant program influenced attempts to create super soldiers in laboratories around the world. Umbrella had opened a door that could never be closed, releasing knowledge that would haunt humanity for generations. Neo-Umbrella and the Names Curse. In 2010, a new organization emerged bearing the name that had become synonymous with corporate evil. Neo-Umbrella claimed to be different from its predecessor, stating that it had been founded by individuals who wanted to redeem Umbrella's legacy and use bioweapon technology for humanity's benefit. The organization's leader, Carla Radames, presented herself as a visionary who understood the power of viral enhancement, but rejected the cruelty that had defined the original corporation. In reality, Neo-Umbrella was exactly what its name suggested, a resurrection of everything that had made Umbrella evil, given new packaging and new justifications. Carla Radames was herself a victim of bioweapon research. Her mind and body altered by experiments conducted by Derek Simmons, a government official who had become obsessed with using viral technology to shape the world according to his vision. Neo Umbrella's stated mission of redemption was a lie, a cover story designed to attract funding and recruits while concealing its true purpose: revenge against those who had wronged its leader. Neo Umbrella's most significant action was releasing the C virus in Lanshan, China, during a G20 summit. The C virus was a hybrid pathogen combining elements of the T. veronica and G viruses, capable of creating both traditional zombies and more advanced mutations called Javo. The attack killed thousands and demonstrated that Umbrella's legacy was not just historical, but ongoing. The cycle of bioweapons development, outbreak, and cover-up continued, fueled by the same ambitions that had driven Oswell Spencer decades earlier. The ease with which Neo Umbrella acquired bioweapon technology revealed a disturbing truth. Despite international agreements and government promises, the research and materials necessary to create bioweapons remained accessible. Some of this was due to inadequate security at government research facilities. Some was due to corruption, with officials selling access to classified data. But much of it was simply the reality that once knowledge exists, it cannot be eliminated. The blueprints for creating T-virus variants, the methodologies for engineering bioweapons, the understanding of how viral enhancement works, all of this had become part of humanity's collective knowledge, impossible to suppress or destroy. Blue Umbrella, redemption or deception. In response to Neo Umbrella's attacks, yet another organization bearing the Umbrella name emerged. Blue Umbrella, distinguished by its blue logo rather than the traditional red, claimed to represent the corporation's redemption. The organization stated that it had been founded by former Umbrella employees who wanted to atone for their past crimes by using their expertise to combat bioterrorism. Blue Umbrella positioned itself as the opposite of everything the original corporation had represented: transparent where Umbrella had been secretive, ethical where Umbrella had been monstrous, dedicated to saving lives rather than exploiting them. Blue Umbrella offered its services to governments and international organizations, providing expertise in bioweapon containment and disposal. The organization employed scientists who had worked on the T virus and other pathogens, arguing that their knowledge made them uniquely qualified to counter bioterrorism threats. Blue Umbrella helped clean up outbreak sites, neutralize bioweapon stockpiles, and provided intelligence on bioterrorist organizations. But the very existence of Blue Umbrella raised questions that had no satisfying answers. Could an organization built on Umbrella's foundation ever truly be trusted? The scientists working for Blue Umbrella had participated in Umbrella's research. How many of them had conducted experiments on unwilling subjects, developed weapons designed to kill thousands, or covered up evidence of corporate atrocities? Was their claimed desire for redemption genuine, or was Blue Umbrella simply another rebranding exercise, a way to access funding and resources while avoiding accountability for past crimes? Critics pointed out that Blue Umbrella's existence allowed former Umbrella personnel to continue working with dangerous pathogens without facing consequences for their previous actions. They argued that the organization's access to government facilities and classified information created opportunities for abuse. Some suggested that Blue Umbrella was exactly what conspiracy theorists feared: Umbrella's core operations continuing under a new name, its leadership learning from past mistakes, and becoming better at hiding their activities. Blue Umbrella's defenders countered that the organization provided genuinely valuable services and that refusing to work with former Umbrella scientists meant ignoring expertise that could save lives. They noted that Blue Umbrella operated under strict oversight, with regular audits and government monitors ensuring compliance with international law. The debate over Blue Umbrella's legitimacy continues, with no clear resolution. What's certain is that the umbrella name carries a curse. Even organizations claiming to oppose everything the original corporation represented find themselves tainted by association. Trust, once destroyed on the scale that Umbrella destroyed it, cannot be easily rebuilt. The blue and white umbrella might promise protection, but too many people remember when that same symbol promised safety while delivering death. The philosophical legacy. Beyond its specific crimes, Umbrella left behind a philosophical legacy that continues to haunt discussions of scientific ethics. The corporation's research was driven by a question that seems innocent but conceals dangerous assumptions. If humans can be improved through science, why shouldn't they be? This question assumes that improvement is objective, that we can determine which traits are desirable and which are not. It assumes that the benefits of enhancement outweigh the risks of attempting it. Most dangerously, it assumes that the ends justify any means, that if we can create something better, we should pursue that goal regardless of the cost in human suffering. Umbrella's bioweapons embodied these assumptions taken to their logical extreme. The T-virus stripped away intelligence and free will, reducing humans to base instincts. But from Umbrella's perspective, this made them better weapons. The G-virus forced constant mutation and reproduction, better for creating bioweapons, even if it destroyed the host's humanity. The Tyrant program created super soldiers who existed only to obey and destroy, better for military applications, regardless of the suffering required to produce them. Each bioweapon reflected a vision of humanity, not as an end in itself, but as raw material, something to be reshaped according to the desires of those in power. This philosophy was not unique to Umbrella. Throughout history, governments and organizations have sought to enhance humans through science, whether through eugenics programs, chemical enhancements, or genetic modification. What made Umbrella different was not its goals, but its scale and its willingness to openly pursue those goals without concern for consequences. The debate over human enhancement continues in the real world, with scientists developing technologies that could fundamentally alter human biology, gene editing, neural implants, pharmaceutical enhancements. All of these raise questions about what we should do with the power to change ourselves. Umbrella's story serves as a warning about what happens when this pursuit is divorced from ethical considerations, when the desire for power overwhelms compassion, and when humans are treated as means rather than ends. The memory that won't fade. Decades after the Raccoon City incident, the memory of Umbrella Corporation remains vivid in popular consciousness. The blue and white Umbrella logo has become a symbol of corporate evil, used in political cartoons and activist campaigns to represent unchecked capitalism and the dangers of privatizing public safety. Survivor groups hold annual memorials on October 1st, the anniversary of Raccoon City's destruction, ensuring that the victims are not forgotten. The Raccoon City incident spawned countless investigations, documentaries, and academic studies. Researchers analyzed how the outbreak spread, how communication networks failed, and how governments responded. The incident became a case study in disaster management programs, though the details were often sanitized, the full extent of Umbrella's crimes minimized to avoid causing panic. For those who survived Umbrella's outbreaks, the psychological impact never fully healed. Many suffered from complex PTSD, experiencing flashbacks, nightmares, and severe anxiety decades after their experiences. Support groups formed to help survivors process their trauma, but the experience of fighting off zombies and bioweapons was so far outside normal human experience that even trained therapists struggled to provide effective treatment. Some survivors became advocates, dedicating their lives to preventing similar disasters. They lobbied for stronger regulations on bioweapons research, greater transparency in corporate operations, and better preparedness for biological threats. Their testimonies before government committees were often graphic and disturbing, forcing legislators to confront the reality of what had happened in Raccoon City. These efforts led to new international treaties and stricter oversight of pharmaceutical and defense corporations, though many felt these measures were insufficient. Others retreated from public life entirely, unwilling to relive their trauma or unable to trust that sharing their experiences would make any difference. Some changed their identities, moving to remote locations where no one knew what they had survived. A few took their own lives, unable to escape the memories of what they had seen and done during the outbreak. The world Umbrella left behind was one fundamentally changed by the knowledge of what corporate ambition could unleash. Bioterrorism became a major focus of national security agencies. Pharmaceutical companies faced increased scrutiny, their research subject to regular audits and oversight. But beneath these surface changes, the structures that had enabled Umbrella remained largely intact. Corporations still wielded enormous power. Research still occurred behind closed doors, and the promise of enhancement through biotechnology still attracted those willing to ignore ethical boundaries in pursuit of power. The Umbrella Corporation was not destroyed by heroes or justice, but by its own failures. It promised paradise through science and delivered apocalypse. It sought power through secrets and found only collapse. The blue and white umbrella that once symbolized protection became a warning, a reminder that evil does not always announce itself with fangs and claws. Sometimes it wears a lab coat, stands behind a podium, and promises a better world. Umbrella's story is a cautionary tale about unchecked ambition, the dangers of treating life as raw material, and the fragility of the systems we trust to protect us. It asks us to consider what we are willing to sacrifice in the name of progress, and whether the promises made by those in power are worth the cost they demand. The monsters in Raccoon City were born from choice, deliberate, calculated, and unforgivable. The dark secrets of Umbrella are not hidden in ancient texts or occult rituals. They are documented in corporate memos, research reports, and the silence of those who knew but said nothing. They are the secrets of ambition without conscience, science without ethics, and power without accountability. And they remind us that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create ourselves, born not from evil intent, but from the simple decision to pursue power without questioning whether that pursuit will lead anywhere worth going. The Umbrella Corporation's legacy lives on in the bioweapons still circulating in the black market, in the survivors still haunted by memories of infection and loss, in the knowledge that humanity now possesses the ability to engineer its own extinction. The umbrella no longer offers protection. It casts a shadow, long and dark, reaching into a future that will never be free from the horrors that three ambitious men unleashed when they stole a flower from people who understood its true nature. In the end, Umbrella's darkest secret was the simplest, that ordinary people, given enough power and enough justification, will commit extraordinary evil. that corporations driven by profit will sacrifice anything that stands between them and their goals, that the system designed to protect humanity can become instruments of its destruction when placed in the wrong hands. The umbrella was meant to shield us from the storm. Instead, it became the storm itself.